Good morning and welcome to our webinar today on pupil wellbeing. We're looking forward to this panel discussion on the return to school following lockdown. My name is Hannah Stolton and I'm the CEO here at Governors for Schools. I'm also a chair of governors at a small primary school in Essex. My colleagues Emma and Ollie will be here helping me with the webinar. If there are any technical questions, do just put something into the chat and they'll try and help. If you have problems with connection, if you just try to log back on via the link that you've already used, then you should be able to get access back to us. At Governors for Schools, we've been thinking for some time about the importance of health and wellbeing for the governing board to support pupils and staff in the schools that we work with. You may have been kind enough to complete our survey that we sent out back in November and then the second one in July this year. Now more than ever, schools are obviously focusing on the wellbeing of their pupils, and we don't need to tell you how key that concentration is going to be in ensuring a successful return to school for all the pupils and to enable them to continue with their learning. This September, Governors for Schools has launched our Wellbeing Governors campaign. Hopefully you've seen some of the promotion material that we've put out. We want to ensure that all governing boards are focused on monitoring this area and advocate that having a wellbeing governor is a good way to ensure this. Of course, for many schools, it might be better that they have a wellbeing committee, or they may feel it's so critical that the whole governing board looks at it together. However you choose to do it, our driver is really to make sure that it is happening. To this end, we've created a wellbeing area on our website. You can access resources there to help wellbeing governors or the rest of the board to support wellbeing in schools. We've got a role description, some questions to ask and a self-review for your governing board. We'll also be sending out some questions following this webinar, and we'll continue to add to this area during the campaign. We've also been sharing our campaign video to help more volunteers come forward to sit on governing boards and support this really important area. If you haven't already seen our animation, we'll share the link in the notes so you can see it, and we'd really appreciate you sharing it on your social media feeds so that we can get the word out there to new governors and potential governors in the population at large. Each term, we're going to focus, change our focus slightly. This term in the autumn, we're really looking at the mental health and wellbeing for children and young people in our schools. So for today's panel, we're welcoming people who can share their experience and ideas around how best governors can support schools to ensure the provision is as good as it can be. As I've already said, we would welcome questions that you have. Please submit your questions via the chat function. What I'll do is hand over to each panellist in turn to talk for a little while, and then we'll pose the questions that you provide to them after they're spoken. We've also gathered some questions before the event, so I have a list of those ready. Hopefully at the end we'll also have time to have a further discussion about any themes that arise during the webinar. So I'd like to welcome our panellists. We have Jack Parsons, who is the CEO of the youth group and a mental health ambassador. He's going to talk about the issue from a young person's perspective. We have Margaret Greenwood, MP for Wirral West and Shadow Minister for Schools. We have Matthew Audley, who is a lead trainer with children's mental health charity Place to Be. We have Adrian Bethune, who's a teacher, a wellbeing advisor and founder of Teach Happy. And we have Rachel Shavilsky, who is a mental health and wellbeing governor at Bisley Church of England Primary School in Surrey. So I'm going to first hand over to Jack, because unfortunately Jack has to leave us halfway through. So we want to allow him time to speak first. So over to you, Jack, if you can tell us a little bit about your experiences.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. It's still morning though. You never know with lockdown now, everything merges into one. And so I'm Jack Parsons, and I run an organisation called the Youth Group, and we have a community of 1.7 million young people, and every day we have young people come to us feeling anxiety, stressed, overwhelmed, but they don't use these words. They don't say I'm feeling stressed because they don't know what these words mean. They go, I don't feel well, or I'm not good enough, or people are being mean. And firstly, what we have to do is go from having all the answers to all the questions when you come across a young person who is struggling with mental health. How do I know this? Well, one, I've been struggling with mental health for the last 18 months. And I grew up with a single parent. My mum was an alcoholic and she lived in a council estate. and I never knew her really sober. But what I didn't know is that actually deep down she had a mental health condition. When I used to come home from school, I used to be really nervous and worried that, will I get dinner tonight, or am I going to get the frying pan over the back of my back? And 3 nights out of the month, I used to get the frying pan over the back of my back. And I was really confused. Why was she being so mean? Why was she being so nasty? And at the end of the day, it was a mental health issue. And it was only until 23 years of old when I started meeting FTSE 100 CEOs and young people themselves and the community that actually realised that mental health is a real issue, it's a real challenge. But as a young person, we don't know what it is. Yes, we see it on EastEnders when our parents are watching EastEnders, and Peggy, well, she's not in the show anymore, but someone is having a mental health breakdown, but we don't really know what it is. So my message is very simple. Don't assume that young people know what mental health is. 2, go from having all the answers to all the questions when you come across some young person with mental health. And 3, don't try and be the expert. I had my own mental health challenges, and overnight, when I reached out on LinkedIn, it reached 15 million people, and I had CEOs come to me, and overnight I'm trying to deal with my own challenges with mental health and suicide, and I've become the therapist. So all the teachers, all the governors out there realise that actually you've got to look after your own mental health as well. Thank you.
Thanks ever so much, Jack. That's really great to hear. Really interesting. I've got a question coming in from somebody. What might schools need to be prepared for in the coming weeks and months? Is there anything in particular that you think that might be, I guess, on the back of COVID in particular?
A lot of young people are going to be frustrated but excited at the same time. So there's going to be a lot of mixed emotion with young people coming back to school. How close can I touch my friends? Well, actually, can I play with my friends? Or even we're going to school, but we can't go out in groups more than 6, or A, B, and C. So there's going to be a lot of confusion. So what you're going to get, especially with now lockdown's over and schools going back, is a lot of questions from young people, and what does this mean, and what does the future look like? And that will have a knock-on effect. That will make young people feel nervous. The big buzzword at the moment in the community of our 1.7 million young people is, I feel overwhelmed. Wow. So a lot of young people are going to feel overwhelmed. So how can you really, really break that down to support the young person in bite sizes? We have to do this in bite sizes. So I believe that the bigger issue we're going to have now lockdown's over and where everyone's going back to school, every young person's going back to school, is the word overwhelmed, but excited, but also nervous around the rules and the regulations.
Okay, thank you. Another question, is there anything that you think your school could have done differently that would have made a difference to your mental health?
I think the number one thing is open the conversation. I didn't hear the word mental health until I was the age of 21. I felt it was I believed it was the people that you see in the film, and the doctors have got the white capes on. And that's the only bit of advice we really got around mental health. What I didn't get advised on is that we all have mental health. Mental health is not going to get dated. It may be better, we may be able to prevent it in the long run, but we all have mental health. And making sure that we help young people to understand that was never advised to us, unfortunately. It was really focused on the other bits of school. And look, this is not me pointing the finger at schools. Teachers do such a good job, and we have to appreciate what the teachers do, actually. And I really respect every teacher out there. But teachers need a little bit of help and education to help the young person to understand what mental health is in the first place.
Thank you. And another question coming in, they're flying in. Will it be worth holding mini bubble talks to our children where they can talk to us about their mental health once we explain what it involves? This is more from a teacher perspective.
Yes, I'm a big believer that we should open conversation, but it has to be in a safe space, and you have to have the experts available. Last thing you can do is open a can of worms. This is not good. A lot of what happens is, oh, let's go and get a coffee. I have a lot of mentors, business leaders say to me, let's go and get a coffee and we can talk about your mental health, but they're not the experts. And as soon as you open that tunnel and you go through that tunnel, you don't have the right support around those young people, it can go in too many directions. What about if the young person goes home and speaks to the parents and they don't understand it and go, oh, you'll be okay tomorrow, don't worry about it. So it's making sure if we're going to open bubbles and we're going to open conversations, that the parents know that we're going to open the conversations and there's the right mechanisms in place. We need to refer that young person even further.
Thank you ever so much. Really, really appreciate your comments there. Thank you, Jack. I'd like to hand over to Margaret now, if that's okay, Margaret.
Thank you very much. And well, fantastic to hear Jack there. I think it's a very hard act to follow. I think his comment, you know, go from having all the answers to all the questions is really such fantastic advice, we might say, for all of us. So a big thank you to Governors for Schools for inviting me to take part in this session. You know, mental health and the wellbeing of pupils is of paramount importance, and without it, really, it is the bedrock of any learning that can take place. The pandemic has really shone a light on so many issues that very often don't get attention and don't get the focus that they deserve. And one of those is mental health and well-being. And I think it's important that we all do what we can in our various roles to make sure that mental health and well-being is at the forefront of thinking of government ministers, of head teachers, teachers and parents in all decisions, really. And also, it's incredibly important that we talk to young people about mental health and well-being, as Jack has just so very clearly demonstrated. I think for governors, there's an opportunity to make a positive statement that they will put mental health and well-being of pupils at the centre of their work in helping to plan the strategic direction of the school, oversee the financial performance and holding the leadership to account. So governors have the opportunity to act as a critical friend, if you like, and make sure that pupil well-being is a key consideration in every decision that's made. I'd also add that it's important that governors support the mental health and wellbeing of teachers too, because it is vital that they are able to work in an environment that supports them to do their job. That has been also made so much harder because of the restrictions of the pandemic. Now, of course, lots of children will be going back to school who will have experienced severe psychological trauma during the pandemic. Many will have lost parents, grandparents, other family members or friends. And then others will have struggled with living in lockdown, perhaps because at home there is nowhere quiet for them to do their schoolwork. Perhaps there's no internet access. They may be one of the, you know, 4.2 million children living in poverty who don't have enough food. And they may be living in a family facing financial uncertainty for the first time. And of course, all the children will have lost out, and young people will have lost out on their opportunity to see their friends face to face and to play with them and so forth. So these are incredibly challenging times for pupils. And as governors, obviously the immediate focus, I think, for any government will be, we want to understand the nature of the problem in your particular school and get a sense of the scale of the problem. So you may want to be asking questions of your leadership about the number of children who are bereaved. It may be that certain parts of your local community have been particularly badly affected. And you also might also be looking to ask the school leadership about the number of children who haven't returned to school and what contact has been made with their parents and what is being done to follow that up, and that consideration is given to the mental health needs and perhaps the wellbeing needs around that. So, for example, with sensitivity around the issue of where there may be clinically vulnerable person in the household, which may be the child or maybe another family member. You might want to think of looking at the school's bereavement policy and asking whether it needs updating in the light of coronavirus. If you look at the work of organisations like Child Bereavement UK, they have a lot of material on their website that is really helpful in terms of thinking about the sorts of activities that are helpful, and that might help you reflect on additional things that will be helpful within your school. So, children's wellbeing is just as important as their return to school-based learning as their academic education. It's the foundation of any learning, and many head teachers are saying that they're going to be using a recovery curriculum that focuses on encouraging children to express their feelings about the pandemic. And of course, expression can take lots of forms, so it can be talking, it can be writing, but it can be drama, it can be music, and it can be art. And it's very important. So as a governor, you might want to ask questions about what opportunities are being created for pupils in this regard. And you might want to also consider how the school is balancing academic work with making sure pupil wellbeing is a priority. Now, some primary schools will be thinking about the introduction of a new test for 4 and 5-year-olds this autumn called the Reception Baseline Assessment. Research by University College London into the pilot of the test last year did find that it caused anxiety, stress, and a sense of failure in many young children. And in many children, they're just children who just arrived at school. So if your school, and we oppose this, the Labour Party opposed this, and we asked the government to abolish the RBA, but unfortunately they didn't. But what they did do, they did put back the statutory requirement until next year, but some schools are electing to do it this year. So if your school is going to be introducing that, you might want to ask questions very soon, actually, because this is going to be happening in the next few weeks, about the ways in which the tests are going to be carried out and what can be done to minimise the risk of pupil anxiety, and also what can also be done to support teachers. Okay, I'm hearing from someone, I'm not sure who that is. You might want to ask about the way in which the test is going to be carried out and how the risk of pupil anxiety can be minimised, and also what can be done to support teachers who are also concerned about the amount of time it takes away from teaching time. Communication between a school and staff, parents and pupils is incredibly important, and so as a governor you might want to look at the effectiveness of those communications as an independent sort of critical friend. And if I talk about just very briefly about the wellbeing of teachers within that, there have been very worrying reports in recent weeks of high stress levels of teachers during these opening weeks of term. So if you're thinking about how as governors you can communicate with staff, you may want to consider talking to teachers directly, you talking to their trade unions, and talk to them about how to identify ways in which their anxieties they may have can be alleviated. That is particularly the case for newly qualified teachers, actually, I would say, because for newly qualified teachers can very often feel very far away from the decision-making process. So making sure that you communicate with the people on the ground, I think, is very important. How a school communicates with parents is massively important. So you might want to look at the school newsletter and make sure that it's and ask whether its commitment to pupils' mental health and well-being is clear. Does it make clear what parents can do if they have concerns about their child? And is it clear how parents can communicate with the school? So is there a dedicated email address for concerns? Is there a post box for people who don't have internet to drop notes into? And how's that available now that pupils aren't going onto the school premises at the moment? And of course, governors might also want to consider asking what is being done to ask pupils about their thoughts about how they can learn in the new and what may be a confusing environment for some. The rules can be confusing. Having to change how desks are laid out can be very disappointing and frustrating for pupils if they're all facing frontwards and they're used to sitting around in clusters. So you might want to sort of have conversations about what can be done to what is being done to ask the pupils about their thoughts about how the teaching is being delivered. In January of this year, the Children's Commissioner warned, as part of her annual children's mental health briefing, of a chasm between what services are available and what children need. I think school governments have a really important role to play in raising the questions and helping schools find solutions so that children's mental health and wellbeing is always on the agenda when decisions are being made.
Lovely, thank you ever so much, Margaret. That was really, really thorough. One of the questions that we've had is, how can teachers balance the need for extra wellbeing work with catch up on missed core education? Quite a fine balance, I think.
That is such an interesting question, and I think that certainly head teachers I've spoken to have said that their immediate priority will be re-establishing the positive relationships with the children, making sure the children are comfortable within school, and they're talking about this idea of a recovery curriculum, which is around giving the children space to talk about what's happened and allowing them to explore their feelings and raise concerns that they have. And I think that teachers are incredibly creative, and I think that if they prioritise those things, the other things will flow. So I think that the thing to do for teachers is really to be confident in your own professionalism. You know your pupils, you know how to teach your pupils, and you understand. You will have, don't forget, I mean, particularly in secondary, teachers teach a huge range of classes in any given week, and so they will know, they will be aware of different levels of anxiety according to the different classes. And so these are for teachers to be confident in their own professionalism, to tailor, what it is that they deliver to those pupils according to their assessment of the children's needs.
Excellent, thank you. I guess that another question that we've had, you touched on anyway, about how governors can gather information from parents and pupils about pupil mental health, and I think you're advocating a post box or that email address. Is there any other ways that you've seen good practice?
I haven't seen any. Just sort of off the top of my head, I suppose the social media is an interesting forum, isn't it? Obviously, you would really want to think through how you would do it because of the confidentiality issue. So, for instance, I heard some parents being very critical of other parents who posted online that their child had symptoms of COVID. Some parents would say, well, I would never say that about my child. So I think there are, you would want to think through very carefully how to open up conversations online, but certainly people like to be able to communicate with the school via Messenger. I know as an MP, people contact me via Messenger. So if you think from the position of what is easiest for the parents to use, I think that, you find that lots of people like to just send a quick message that way. So I think from the governor's point of view, thinking through who is responding to those messages, it's quite a task, isn't it? Because if you have that online presence, then you have to have someone monitoring it, and you will want to have an outline, a set of protocols about, how you deal with things, because all sorts of things will come up, and people express things in all sorts of different ways. But I think making it as easy as possible for parents to communicate is massively important, because they're their children, and the school, the school is looking after them all day, every day, 5 days a week. But for parents to feel connected with the school, I think will really help in terms of alleviating concerns, addressing specific concerns. And it also is an opportunity for parents to feed through really practical things that parents will notice. Parents will see things, you've got thousands of eyes and ears out there. They'll see things that can help in a situation. So I think that having that communication can be incredibly important. But of course, it's a sizable job to respond to it. So the governors can ask the questions within the school, right? Who is it that's going to be responding to those, and how are those comments then going to be filtered through to the decision makers in the school?
Thank you ever so much, lovely. I'm going to hand over to Matthew Audley now, who from Place to Be.
Can you hear me? I'm hoping you can now. Yeah. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much to Governors for Schools to inviting Place to Be to talk today. Much of my work focuses on supporting head teachers to think about developing their mental health strategy. I run quite a lot of reflective practice groups with head teachers to help them to think about that process, whilst considering their own well-being in the process. And it's I was really interested to hear what Jack you were saying about the buzzword being that children are feeling overwhelmed at the moment, because that's exactly what head teachers are saying. I'm feeling overwhelmed and I'm feeling exhausted. I think it's a sort of you know, for want of a better phrase, a sort of pandemic experience. It's sort of affecting us all. And I had a thought about what I'd like to share with you out of my experience with head teachers in particular. And I've got three kind of key thoughts, key areas that I want you to, would like you to consider. The first is about relationships. And what do you know about relationships in the school community? And what do you know about attachment theory and its relevance to the school context as well? But the way that a child attaches to a parent in early months plays a critical part in how they learn. And when an infant voices their distress in response to their needs, like when they're hungry or they need to feel close, the parent receives the message, tunes and responds. So the child takes in the message that I'm cared for, and the world in the main responds to my needs. So I develop an internal working model which is both my view of myself and how the world relates to me, that the world is safe and adults will respond to my needs. And I think this is the same as the learning process. You know, when I arrive at school in the early years, I'm letting go of my parents at the school gate and I'm exploring a new world. If I'm not sure what to do or where to go, I need to turn to my teacher for reassurance. And with that help, I repair my confidence. And this builds my capacity and in my ability to learn. And all learning happens, therefore, in a relational context. And I think you always need to be aware of this to integrate that understanding into your thinking about when you think about the mental health and the well-being of the school. So it's really about building the capacity to reflect in the school context. It's not just about the what we do, but the how we do it. I use the phrase breathe between the thoughts with head teachers. They like that because it gives them a bit more space to enjoy their thinking and take their time. It builds up their own sense of capacity. So that's my first thought. My second thought is, in our relational context, I'd like to add a community family metaphor. Head teachers are really like grandparents to the school community, and the staff are like the parents, and families and their children are like the children in the school context. And I'm wondering, you know, where you are in this family metaphor. Margaret used the phrase "critical friend." I like that. I was going to use the phrase "great uncle or aunt," something like that. Sort of, you know, sort of someone who you can turn to for that kind of listening ear, who's kind of slightly outside of the situation as well. But I firmly believe that your support. It needs to be support in a school context needs to be cascaded. You start first with the head teacher. You know, how's their well-being? How is that supported? How can you directly support their well-being? How do you ask questions of them in your oversight role? You know, it's really about building their capacity to do the best job that they can. And I see that as a mental health question. And finally, so once you've got the kind of relational under your belt, and you've thought about you know, how you might cascade support, you can think about the strategic. I wrote a document which you may have read already that I think is on the website, called Questions for School Governors to Consider When Developing and Maintaining a Mentally Healthy School. I mean, it's just all questions with it set out in different domains. And it's built on our Mental Health Champion School Leader Training Program. The 7 sections, the key questions for you to think about are, do you understand what mental health is? That's number 1. You know, if not, how are you going to find out? Number 2 is what's the nature of working relationships in your school? Thirdly is what's the school's mental health policy and strategy? How is it functioning? These are all questions for you to kind of to think, to ask with your head teachers, your senior leadership team, to inquire more. 4th is what is the nature and efficacy of universal, additional or specialist mental health provision for children in your school? 5th, where does the school fit in relationship to bigger educational and mental health trends? 6th, how do you go about understanding your school? So what's your, how are you finding out about these sort of mental health needs in your school? What's your approach to that? And what part, finally, can you play in the collaborative process? I mean, I think in a sense that is the sort of key question, sort of what part can you play and how are you playing it? There are some additional questions and information that I put on in relationship to the current situation, particular questions that you might want to think about. But I mean, just to recap, it's just those key points about attachment theory and relationships, cascading support, and then you can think about strategy and asking the right questions of your head teacher and how you can support them. Okay.
Lovely. Thank you very much. I've got a question here come through that was really interesting to go through the different areas to consider and the questions. I think there's lots of questions there to take away, and absolutely that is on our website and we can share that afterwards. Yep. One of the questions I've had is, what kind of things should a governor be looking at regarding if a governor is specifically a wellbeing governor, what sort of things should they be looking out for?
One of the questions I'm often asked is about sort of, should we have a mental health policy, strategy, as it were, separate policy? I'm not always sure really, because I think you can sort of create a rod for your own back. It's quite often you've got a behaviour policy already that needs some sort of tweaking and sort of adjusting and sort of reframing. I know one school that I work with changed their behaviour policy to a wellbeing policy with a few sort of tweaks, and it changed the perspective within the school. So thinking about that, do you need a mental health policy or is it behaviour policy? How do you frame that? I think framing it framing behaviour in terms of well-being is kind of really helpful. So that's kind of one thing I would say. The second is really just to ask the head teacher and senior leadership team to tell you more about the different kinds of provision that they are offering in the school for different levels of mental health need, whether that's universal provision or additional support for children with identified needs or specialist support. I think the more you sort of understand about those processes and how you can help the school to think about them, the better.
Excellent, thank you. And touching on some of the issues about head teachers' own mental health, we've had a question: how do we approach these issues at the moment when head teachers are already overworked and some are overwhelmed and are dealing with so much, and yet we're all operating in a remote way? It's a fine balance between being a critical friend and creating extra stress, something I can definitely relate to as a governor. How do you suggest we approach that?
Well, the best way, an easy way, is contact organisations like ourselves who provide we have a service called The Place to Think, which is a supervisory reflective practice group sessions usually for head teachers to kind of process, make sense of all the stresses and strains that in their role, whilst reflecting on the challenges that they are confronted with. You know, I think that head teachers in particular need that space and time to think. If they haven't got it, they're going to be sort of running, they're going to be, the phrase that they often use is firefighting. They're moving from one fire to the next. And if they haven't got that time to kind of process the impact of what they're dealing with, they can't think straight, because they're feeling too overwhelmed. So make sure they've got that time and that proper support. It's not about therapy, it's about sort of thinking time. That's the main thing.
Okay, thank you ever so much, Matthew. That's really interesting. I'm going to hand over now to Adrian to talk to us.
Hi there, can you hear me? Okay. Excellent, thank you. So yeah, it's really interesting hearing from the first three speakers, and something that resonated from Jack's kind of introduction was about asking questions, and that's kind of my main angle. So I'm a part-time primary school teacher at Broughton Junior School. I'm also the wellbeing lead governor there, and I wrote a book a couple of years ago called Wellbeing in the Primary Classroom. So my kind of passion is what we can do on an everyday basis to promote positive mental health and wellbeing for pupils and for staff, so that it isn't this kind of add-on. It's not just something you do once a week, that it's woven into the curriculum, and it doesn't matter whether you're teaching English or maths, that well-being kind of seeps through those lessons. And well-being in say a maths lesson is around the level of challenge and the level of support, and it's about the way you feed back and the way you mark work. It's literally everything. So from my perspective, you know, schools that promote positive mental health and well-being well, in a way, aren't changing much dramatically in response to COVID, because this is just part of what they do on an everyday basis. Going back to the point about questions, something that I am quite keen on in schools when done well is well-being surveys. So like, as a governor, how do you know how your staff, how your pupils, how the parents are feeling? You need to ask questions. You need to ask them about their mental health and well-being. And one of the best ways I think of doing that is surveys. I can put a link in the chat. I wrote a blog for the What Works Centre for Wellbeing about measuring wellbeing in schools and colleges. And there are some really good, robust, for pupil wellbeing, there are some really good, robust measures of wellbeing. At my school, we use the Good Childhood Index, which is a kind of list of survey questions generated by the Children's Society, who every year publish the Good Childhood Report. There are others out there as well. The Anna Freud National Centre for Children and Families have a whole wellbeing toolkit of measures that you can use. So there are measures out there that schools can choose that are right for their context. We also have a staff wellbeing survey, and we're asking questions about essentially how are you feeling. So we're asking about their mental health and wellbeing, and then we're asking specifically, like Matthew said, we're asking about their relationships. How well do you feel you're getting on with your peers? What's your sense of belonging in your classroom? How are you getting on with your teachers? And we ask these questions of pupils, and we ask them of staff. And so you get a baseline, and then any work you're doing to promote mental health and well-being, you can track changes over time. So you can see if the work that you're doing to promote positive mental health and well-being is actually having the impact you want it to have. You can also, depending on how you measure, we use a tool called Bounce Together at my school. You can kind of dig down in the data. So we get an overall snapshot. Let's just focus on pupils for the moment, of how our pupils are feeling about life in school and their lives in general. And then we can kind of dig down. We can compare boys versus girls. We can look at SEN groups. We can look at children on pupil premium. And that's been really interesting for us, because we can see certain groups of children that maybe need more support than they're currently getting. So we can look at who's thriving in our school community and who needs that extra support. And I think governors should be able to answer the question, what does your school do to promote positive mental health and well-being? Because I think, you know, that term mental health, you know, when everyone says, oh, we all have mental health just like physical health, when you talk about physical health, you don't start from a deficit model. You know, predominantly when you say, oh, you know, what's your health like, you generally are saying, oh yeah, my health's good, or, you know, you might have fluctuations. But when we talk about mental health, predominantly, I think we still think about things like anxiety and feeling overwhelmed and depression, when actually positive mental health is about how we handle and relate to our feelings, our moods and our emotions, and understanding that yes, they'll fluctuate up and down, but there are things that we can do to look after ourselves. The most important thing, as Matthew said, is our relationships and our supportive networks. But yeah, governors should be able to answer that question. What does your school do to promote positive mental health and well-being? One way that, you know, we do this at my school, Matthew touched upon mental health policy. We don't have a mental health policy at my school, but we have a mental health and well-being statement. It's on our website, and it broadly captures what we do to promote positive mental health and well-being. So any governor can read it and understand. Any parent can read it. Any prospective teacher that's applying for a job at our school can see what we do to support pupils and parents and staff. Another thing that we're going through the process of at the moment, which I found really beneficial as a member of staff and a governor, is we're applying for a mental health award through Leeds Beckett University. They have the Carnegie Centre of Excellence for Mental Health, and you start by doing an audit, and it's got 8 strands. It's got governance and leadership. It's got support for pupils, support for staff and parents. It's got how you work with outside agencies like CAMS and any, you know, counsellors or whoever you get into schools to support pupils. And you look at your strengths, and then you look at the things you need to work on, and that's really beneficial for us. Like only when you kind of dig down into what you do on a day-to-day basis can you see, okay, actually these areas need more focus. So those are just kind of some of the ways that I think governors can support schools in this, which is, yeah, I think predominantly surveys done well can be really kind of beneficial.
Thank you ever so much, Adrian. Definitely a couple of points I've noted down there to go away and do. How often do you ask the staff and the children the surveys? How often do you survey them?
So last year was the first year that we started it, and the plan was to do it. We did it in autumn term, and then the plan was to do it at the end in summer term as well. So twice a year. Because of COVID, last year's was scuppered, so we didn't get to do follow-up pupil surveys, but we did do staff surveys twice. So we did it during lockdown near the beginning, and then we did it towards the end when I think it was in June, July, when year groups were starting to come back, and we were asking staff how they were feeling, but also we were asking them how well supported they felt during lockdown, how well communicated they felt they were by SLT, and then also kind of we were asking them what did they feel they needed in order to come back. And also in my school specifically, we asked them, it was just practical questions. Do you have childcare for your children at home in order to come back? Do you feel okay to come back? Because we didn't want to force any teachers that were highly anxious at the time to force them back into a classroom with children, because like Matthew said, we understand attachment theory. If the teacher at the front of the class is stressed and really anxious, that's going to feed up into the children. What was really positive is that our staff felt well supported. Our staff generally felt that their health and well-being was positive. And we could compare that data in lockdown compared to the autumn data in a normal school year. And that was really interesting for us. So yeah, I would say normally at the beginning and end of the year, but you can be pragmatic and ask further surveys depending on what's happening.
Thank you. We've had a few questions about where people can buy your book and the awards information. So we'll put those links in the information section. One other question is again on the surveys: should the governors manage the surveys, or should that be the SLT?
I think governors should review the results, definitely. So as a member of staff, I administered the surveys with the buy-in from the deputy and head teacher. So we agreed the questions that we're going to ask. And then I presented, as wellbeing lead governor, I presented the results at the full governing body. And then during lockdown as well, the results were shared by email to the governing body, so everyone could kind of see how staff were doing. It's important at the beginning of the process, though, that you let children and staff know what the survey's for, what you're going to do with the data, who it's going to be shared with. Our surveys were anonymous, and we made that clear. We wanted children and staff to feel that they could be as open as possible. So yeah, and there is, and again, I can put the link in, there's an organisation called CORC, Child Outcomes Research Consortium, and they have a whole e-learning module about measuring wellbeing in schools, and it's really, really useful, and I would recommend, it takes probably an hour or so to do it. I'd recommend that.
Fantastic, thank you ever so much, really interesting. I'm going to hand over to Rachel now, who's the wellbeing governor. So Rachel, over to you.
Hi. Well, I mean, everyone who's preceded me has said a lot of good things. So I guess listening to everything they've said, really, you know, my role here is to talk about how it actually feels to be a governor in the school, especially one who isn't a teacher or a parent of a child in that school. So I definitely would say I am that kind of outside critical friend in that respect. And what I would say is I've only been a governor for a year. So, you know, if you're interested, you know, people being governors, I think they can get like a little bit scared of, oh, everybody else here might be more experienced than me. I don't really know what I'm doing. So as a governor yourself, especially as a new one, you have to just remember that the school chose you as a governor and that you have something to add. And I think that this topic itself is something that reaches across all different parts of the world, right? You know, I work in finance in London, but of course I can use my experiences in other areas of my life to understand mental health and well-being. I may not be the expert in schools, but that's what the rest of the governing board and head teacher are there to do as well. This topic particularly interested me, so I was very pleased to be appointed the wellbeing governor. And what I did to prepare is actually take the opportunity that my son's school offered, which was to do a cash level 2 mental health and wellbeing certificate. So I got to do that, you know, mostly online, and that really did give me an insight into how to define mental health and well-being and how that impacts different children at different ages. And I think, you know, the more you can do as a governor to support your own understanding of the topic is obviously, you know, crucial to start with. And then I think the next point is that I really felt from the start that Bisley really put well-being at the front of everything they do. The first things that I heard when I went to governor meetings were around how the child has to be happy and healthy, and that teaching has to come after that. So I think to the points that others have made is, you know, you can't teach a hungry child, you know, you can't teach a sad child. You've really got to get to what is it that's blocking them from even starting to learn. And I would say that the things that Bisley do in practice are very much around making sure that every child that comes into school is in the place to learn. And you know, there's so many things that I think that they're doing very well already. So that's made it then slightly easier, I think, with the whole post-COVID environment to say, okay, well, I think we have the basics and we've done all the groundwork and we definitely have that ethos as a school. So it gives you more confidence that you can then deal with the more specific issues that come up with something like the pandemic. So I think to give some practical examples, we have things like a lot of child-led initiatives in terms of circles for them to talk about, give them the opportunity to talk. You know, we mentioned that sort of safe space, which is incredibly important for children. And also, you know, we have a committee for children, so they have their own voice. They can run that and they can be open, and it really then shows, you know, other children that that's what it's there for, and they can really be the leaders of their own future in terms of health and well-being. And you know, on the teacher front, I think that's again something that I really noticed was how much the head teacher at Bisley spends time talking about her teachers and their well-being and what she can do to support them, and the different things that she's got in place to make, you know, sort of taking time off and bereavement and all of those topics have quite a large pastoral team at Bisley, so I think that's really paid off. And I think in the past maybe pastoral teams have been relatively small, but that might be an interesting thing to watch now. How many schools have increased their pastoral support. Yeah, and I think to finish it off, the head teacher themselves, for me, that is, something I watch, and I'm really proud of the rest of the governing board that they take such interest in our head teacher's well-being herself, and so, what can we do ongoingly to support her. And she's phenomenal. The amount of stuff she's doing in the school and for the community. I mean, I think that's the other thing that I'd say is, like, we talk about it all within the context of the school, but actually it's the context of the community around the school. And so if you're really looking holistically at the different aspects of the community you live in and what you can do to support that, then obviously that feeds into the children in school specifically.
Excellent. Thanks ever so much, Rachel. Good to hear a real governor perspective there. How can governors take a strategic approach to supporting people mental health and wellbeing? I think there's a problem with not getting operational and getting too involved. People find that quite a difficult balance. How have you managed that?
Well, again, I think because my position is that I don't go to the school frequently as a parent, and I'm not a teacher, I guess I can always try to maintain that sort of business view of how the school runs. And I think strategically, like points that other people have made, do you need a policy or not? Like, just really having a look at it in relation to the school and how it works. And I think there's definitely a lot you can do without having to be involved in the operational. If you have good communication with the head teacher and the senior leadership team, I think they can give you enough, clarification on what happens on a day-to-day basis that you shouldn't really need to step into the, the details of the operational role. But it is just about asking those questions, and there aren't any stupid questions. You might think, oh, if I ask that, has she already told me, or but I think it's always just worth asking the questions. And again, that kind of relationship thing, you don't want to put a teacher under a kind of like, you're asking questions for the sake of it or being too challenging. It is about getting that balance right, that you are there to support them. And there might be a period of time where you're asking lots of questions because for yourself, you want to understand the process. And then you can start to be a bit more strategic about, well, where are the gaps? And I think some of the stuff that Adrian was mentioning and what schools can do sounds really interesting, and I'm definitely going to look into those a bit more.
Lovely, thank you. And one more that's particularly pertinent to you. For those governors who don't feel confident about supporting people mental health and wellbeing at the moment, what do you think they could do to get started on the journey? So I guess people just starting out like you were a while back.
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, I did some training myself because that's what I was interested in doing, and I think you can always keep learning. And I think it's difficult because visiting the school might be something that's slightly harder for people to do, but I think it is important to do that as and when we can, just to get a feel for how things are in the school. And I think as a wellbeing governor, that's probably more important for that topic. So I would say just making sure that you talk to your fellow governors and that you have everybody's views and understanding, and really working as a group, because as much as you can stand and critique stuff as the wellbeing link governor, it's not about that. It's about working as a governing board together. So it's really getting everybody's different views. They will all have a different perspective to bring.
Brilliant, thanks ever so much. Okay, we've got a couple of questions for the whole panel now, so I will put the first one out there. We've got, are there any practical examples again of what we can do now during this firefighting phase? So I guess in the current situation. So would anybody like to step in there?
I mean, I would.
Let me just. Go for it, Adrian.
Say, Margaret and Matthew both, and Rachel, all talked about the importance of kind of looking after head teachers. They are one group working in schools right now that I'm genuinely kind of concerned for. I know, speaking to teaching colleagues, that teachers are shattered already. It's only a few weeks in, but head teachers just haven't switched off since this whole thing started. You know, when schools were still looking after key worker children during half term, Easter, summer, well, not some holidays, but head teachers were often in summer holidays trying to get their schools safe for return. So I would say, you know, not constantly, but regularly check in with your head teacher, and certainly they do not need any more pressure right now. You can rest assured that there is plenty of pressure on head teachers' shoulders right now. If anything, you should be asking yourself, what can you do to alleviate some of that pressure? Like, is there anything that you could do? Often just being a listening ear. If there is budget, like Matthew was saying, for head teachers to have supervision, then that would be, I think, really beneficial. So that's what I would be saying. What can you do to alleviate pressure on head teachers right now? Because they definitely need it.
Thank you. I just want to add to what you're saying there, Adrian. I think it's really important to set realistic expectations at the moment. You know, if expectations are too demanding for head teachers, for teachers, for children, it's not going to work. You know, everyone's coming back into school. It's an unfamiliar place. It's a new kind of new normal as well. And the most important thing at the moment for everyone is to settle into, to get on together as well. When you feel that you're getting on together again, then you can focus more on the learning. That's the sort of key. And who knows, there may be kind of further lockdowns and periods when children and teachers will be separated from their schools as well. So helping the school to settle in and being realistic about expectations, I think is critical.
Lovely, thank you. Another question that we have. Go on, yes, go please, Margaret, please do.
I really would. Fantastic responses from Adrian and Matthew. I think, you know, head teachers have been working flat out for months and months and months, and I think anything that governors can do to alleviate the pressure that they're under is really, really going to be helpful. And again, similarly with teachers, you know, it's a very stressful situation for them, so anything that can be done to support them, it has to be a priority, really, I think.
Lovely, thank you. Another question is, how should the school be addressing wellbeing and mental health issues in particular communities in the school where it might be more prevalent? Any thoughts on particular groups of students, I guess, or yeah, that maybe suffering more than others? Rachel, would you like to go?
I mean, I think that the problem we've got right now is that there might be extra children who are suffering that maybe never would have in the past, and maybe don't really know how to then process that or how to talk about it. So I think actually most schools, if they've got specific elements of their community that they know they're working with, you know, I'd like to think they had some provision for those in place. And of course, you can always challenge whether you're giving the right level of provision to different areas, but I think actually spotting children who may for the first time be really stressed, it's them who maybe don't know how to talk about it. And you know, when you're so busy running around the school doing everything you usually do, you know, I think that's somewhere where it could get missed.
Okay,
Could I just say something there?
Yeah, sure, Margaret, and then Adrian, I think that's just it. Yeah.
Oh, so is that all right, Hannah? Thank you.
Yes,
in relation to that, I think you know, it's always important to consider those children who are, you know, struggling the most in any situation, because if you do that, then the rest, you know, can follow. But I think at the moment, given huge numbers of families facing financial difficulty and huge increase in food bank use and so forth, if there's things that governors can do around, I don't know if it's something that governors would feel that they ought to do, but around looking at what's available in the local community and helping around signposting people to support, because it's actually very frightening what's going on in terms of levels of deprivation, and that whole we're getting families who've never had to seek any sort of help before having to go for help. So I think anything governors can do around that area to support their school community will be really, really helpful.
Thank you. Did you want to come in? Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we know from kind of other reports that have come out that BAME communities have been disproportionately affected by COVID in different ways. So that potentially might be the case in your school community. However, to go back to Jack's point, we shouldn't assume anything just because, about any family right now, because there might be kind of white middle class families that are struggling financially, and that's going to have a knock-on impact on children's mental health. So to go back, not that it's the silver bullet, but we're about to publish our parent survey, and one of the last questions we asked parents, and it's a comment box, and we're going to do it digitally, and we're going to do paper copies to pick up in the office, is there anything that we can do further to support your child's mental health and well-being, or your family's mental health and well-being? And then we're just going to see what our families, our community are going to tell us. And if if, for example, families are going to say they're struggling financially, it might be about signposting into services like the money advisory service that offers free financial advice. We don't know yet because we don't know what they're going to say. So I just, ask questions and listen, and then see what you can do to support your community.
Excellent, thank you. It is 12 o'clock, but we do have one last question, which I think is key, so I am going to ask it, and then we'll wrap up. Is safeguarding and well-being in schools the same thing? So I guess this is where those two areas really cross over.
Yeah,
Matthew?
I can answer that. I mean, kind of yes and no is the answer, really. I mean, where well-being of children is concerned, the safeguarding issues are likely to be involved as well. And where there's a safeguarding issue with a child, it's likely to be related to their well-being. Safeguarding issues are really about the behaviour in the whole family, and that impacts on the well-being of the child. So and we always need to view the child's situation in that holistic systemic context, really. So yes, it's always, in a sense, it's not indivisible. It is divisible in terms of the different roles of different people that deal with it. But where children have safeguarding issues, there's always a mental health issue. It's the same with children that have learning developmental or Asperger's symptoms as well, that there is always a mental health component that's attached to that as well, that you have to understand the impact on their lives as well. So yes, the mental health component is always there.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I was just going to add, completely agree. And what I would say is take away any safeguarding issues, and there can still be kind of mental health, not problems, but there could be, that doesn't mean that you have good mental health because there's no safeguarding concerns. You can still have levels of anxiety, levels of low mood, which is why I think this whole school approach to promoting positive mental health and well-being to underpin your safeguarding work as well is really important.
Thank you so much. Did anyone, Rachel or Margaret, would you like to come in on that, or are we okay?
No, just agree.
Okay.
Hannah, I'm sorry, can I just promote our Mental Health Champions Foundation program, which is an online program which is really a kind of a starter to help teaching staff to understand about mental health issues and how to think about it in the school context. It's a free program that's available through Place to Be, and we're aiming to access that support for 50,000 teachers across the country. So I know it's on your website, so do access.
I think we tweeted about it yesterday as well. Excellent. Okay, thank you ever so much to our panellists. It was really great to hear your thoughts, and there's lots of takeaways. I've certainly been writing down a few notes that I will be taking away from my own governing board. So really appreciate your time today. I hope it was useful for everybody out there.